Hello, my name's Charlie Sharman. I'd like to welcome you to this event, Strat to Action. I'd like to explain a little bit about the event before we get to our panel. I'd like to introduce the panel and then we'll open up the subject. So the book, Strat to Action, was written with three principles in mind. The first one was within the Kaizen Institute. We needed a tool to offer to ourselves, to the partners and the consultants that would engage CEOs. And this is where Strat to Action. In a lot of discussions, we found that CEOs were getting frustrated. They could quite easily identify the strategy, but they found it a bit more of a problem to get it to actually operate in the business. So we decided to, 3 years ago, write the book. So the book firstly is for internal use. It's to teach consultants, partners, how to engage CEOs and help them in their transformation. The second part is that it's a guide to CEOs and executives. It's written in 5 languages now, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian, and it's being launched in English, hence this event. And then finally, something that I've learned over past 10, 12 years, especially with Danaher, is how you can use Kaizen to deliver strategy. And perhaps some of you have very competent continuous improvement programs, but you look at it more incrementally rather than breakthrough. And so the book takes you through the Danaher approach, using the Danaher business system to actually use Kaizen to deliver strategic breakthrough and multiply its effect. So that said, the event is driven in 2 parts. The first part is about CEO-led transformation, strategy, what the strategies are, what the challenges are in the business. And the second part is around deployment and driving Strat through to action. So I'd like to firstly welcome our panel. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you Francisco Riberas, who is Executive Chairman of Gestamp. And in 2 decades, he's built a 9 billion first-tier automotive business. And notwithstanding the challenges then, looking at the challenges now, connectivity, the change from diesel, petrol to electric, and all of us are expecting more performance, better quality, higher cost, lower cost, excuse me. So I'm looking forward to Francisco talking us through where he came from and what the challenges are moving on and how his strategy is changing. I'm then very pleased to introduce Victor Neves, who is CEO of Colep, another world-class supplier in a different segment. It's contract manufacturing. Vitor has, over the last 20 years, built a very successful company and is now transforming again. It would be interesting to hear his views on how Strat to Action has helped him in determining what the new strategies are. So we will then move over to the second part of the event, which is all about delivery. And we have Peter Evans, Continuous Improvement Director for Lego, and Mark Wilson, Global Business Improvement Director for Ocado. And I'll introduce them more fully when we get to the deployment of the strategic objectives. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Francisco, and perhaps he could walk us through his extremely challenging journey in Gestamp. Francisco.
Okay, good afternoon, and thanks, Charlie, for your introduction and for inviting me to join this event. Of course, this idea around how to move a strategy to action is not a simple question, and probably there is not a simple answer. But I will try to, let's say, review the history of our company in order to see what we have been able to do. No? In fact, it's true that you mentioned that our company started basically at the end of the 90s, but it's also true that the real origin of our group started when my father, at the end of the 50s, started a steel service center business called Gombari. No? In the beginning, we started in the auto components business just as a vertical integration of our steel service center. But it was in 1997 when we decided to really incorporate a new company. I moved from Gombari to this company, to Gestamp. We funded that. And we decided to focus basically in the development and manufacturing of metal car components. And we decided to do so at that time because this sector was already large, but the trend in terms of growth of this sector was huge. It was a real opportunity because the car makers were expanding everywhere in the world, and they were launching many models, and they needed to outsource the design and the manufacturing of the single components in order to be able to focus in their mainstream. So at the end of the day, for instance, today, 75% of the industrial added value of a car is made by our sector. No? And another important clear factor is that this sector, the auto sector, is controlled by large companies. So we knew that from the beginning, and we decided that it was needed a clear size, a clear critical mass, in order to be able to have the right strategic interaction with this kind of big companies. No? So size matters at that time, and we decided to really move in that direction. And in order to grow, we built a kind of simple strategy that probably remains basically the same, that we wanted to grow, and we wanted to grow by covering the most important needs of these large customers, which were in our kind of components, to be able to become global. That means to open plants everywhere they were moving, and not just in Europe, because it was very important for them to localize these components because of logistics. And at the second time, trying to be able to become a technological leader, giving specific solutions in our materials, in our products, and in the different technologies. No? And based in two main operational pillars, which was trying to be able to have an excellence in operations, that for us at the end of the day is the best cost price, the best quality levels, and the best service every day. And that has to be based in a very, very good and motivated team. And of course, in being reliable. I mean, our customers are giving a lot of trust on us, because any problem of our components will stop their assembly lines. So we need to be reliable in operations and also financially. So that was the strategy, simple strategy we defined. And so we moved from being a kind of a small company just in Spain, built to print manufacturer, not research and development. And we started to grow. And we started to grow not only by organic, but also by acquisitions. We did not have too many people, too relevant teams in order to do so. So we made a mix in between organic and inorganic. So we first consolidated the business in Spain. Then we moved to the headquarters of our European customers, basically in France and Germany. And we started some kind of globalization in Latin America, which was maybe a little bit easier for us. And in parallel, we built our first research and development centers, and we incorporate new technologies around the manufacturing of these metal components. Just to do it short, before the crisis of 2008, we were able already to have a critical size. We had around 2 billion euros turnover. We were already working in many customers, and we were not anymore a kind of build-to-print supplier. 2008 was a kind of shake for the global economy, and also for the auto. We had some kind of 3 quarters, there was a drop in manufacturing of cars of more than 40%. And at that time, what we did is implemented, like everybody, a kind of crisis plan, focusing in our people and preserving the cash and flexibility. We did that quite well, quite quickly. So by the end of 2009, we were ready to grow again. There were many opportunities in the market because many suppliers were in difficult solutions, and we were supporting our customers to sort out these problems. We did important acquisitions in 2010, the German company ECHA, and also the division of metal forming of ThyssenKrupp, with important areas in UK, for instance, with talent. These two acquisitions were basically bigger size than the one we had before the crisis. And since then, we have started to really grow more in different countries which were growing, like China or India or Russia. And of course, betting very, very strongly in the area of technologies. Again, to do it short, by 2019, we have been able to reach the size that you mentioned before, close to 9 billion euros turnover. We were already present in 24 countries with 114 industrial plants. No? And already we were a public company because we decided to went public in 2017. And okay, so that was the status in 2019, let's say before the COVID. No? So I think, of course, COVID has been a real point of reference. But I would say that maybe for the car maker and the auto sector, as you mentioned before, Charlie, the crisis started a little bit before, and it started with the disruptions around what we call the case. So that means the growing importance of areas like connectivity, like everything around the shared mobility, and everything, of course, around the electrical vehicle, especially electrical vehicles, that is forcing our customers to deploy a huge amount of money in order to be able to launch EV vehicles and hybrids. And of course, for final customers, which are still, have a lot of uncertainties whether to move from diesel to EVs whenever there is not infrastructure in place. No? So that causes already a decrease in manufacturing of vehicles in 18 and 19 before the COVID happened. So when COVID happened, the situation of the auto was absolutely difficult, let's say. And global economy, as you know very well, that declined by 3.3%. So it was a complete disaster. And the auto production fell by 16%, but especially in the first half of the year. So it was an absolute problem. We reacted again with a short-term plan, in this case, very much focused in the beginning to preserve the health of our people with very strict sanitary protocols, but at the same time, trying to be able to reduce the activity of our plants. At the same time, our customers were shutting down their factories. So we did that, and then in parallel, we built a huge amount of cash with our banks, and we implemented with the unions and with the councils all kinds of flexibility measures very quickly. So at the end of the day, even if 2020 we have our first losses, we were able to generate a very important free cash flow, and we were able to reduce our debt. No? So that was by 2020, and of course, for the future, in 21 and 22, we need to focus a little bit more in stabilization after this growth, and to focus in free cash and to be able to control our debt. And for the future, of course, we need to keep on growing, and the case is going to be there. But we have different levers in order to be able to keep on growing, which is, of course, the technology and everything around helping our customers to develop EVs and to reduce CO2 emissions by means of providing lightweight solutions, which is one of our specialties. And of course, for the future, yeah.
Francisco, I was just, if you look at the way your strategy is formed, obviously a big part of it is innovation and working with the customer in their innovation. But try and tell us how important QCD, the basic standards of excellent quality, superb delivery, keeping the cost base right. Is it an equal effort, or is it more biased towards technology or towards service excellence and agility? Perhaps walk us through that a little bit.
Well, I think you know well that the auto sector is rather competitive, so it has to be a mix. If you don't have a kind of a product and a kind of technology which is special to them, there is no way you are going to be able to capture nominations and growth. But then the margins are still very strict, and that means that if you are not able to do everything on time and with the best quality from the first moment, there is no way you are going to be able to get the return that you were expecting. So there is a mix. And of course, when we are talking about mature plants in areas that we still control, maybe it's not so difficult, let's say, to try to keep levels of excellence in production. But when you are starting in the last 4 years that we have started 15 different greenfield operations, then the situation is difficult because you need to start from the beginning, not only developing the process and technologies that you already have, but you need to build plants in areas like India or China. You need to have people in place, you need to train them, and then you need to be able to get very quickly to the level of excellence. And don't forget that in auto, quality levels are measured in the problems by million, and we need to be below 30, below 40 problems or defects by million. So both of things are absolutely clear. You need to be strategical for customers. In our case, is technology and footprint. But if you are not able to deliver every day the best price, cost, and quality, I think there is no way. There is no way you can.
Perhaps one last comment. In the 80s and 90s, we were driven in the automotive industry to take on board continuous improvement, both in our supply chains and in our manufacturing processes. And so perhaps you accept, it's much more standardized, baked into the concrete. So maybe this question, how critically important is Kaizen and continuous improvement in both stabilizing your business and enhancing your profitability? Do you see it that way?
Well, in our sector, we need to reduce prices every day. So if you are not able to get this productivity from your processes, then you are not going to be able to really give these productivities away. So it will be money from your pocket to the pocket of your customer. So there is no other way to do that. The problem sometimes is that the normal operations, you need to find some specific ways in order to further improve them. And right now, what we see clearly is the opportunity for introduction, everything around Industry 4.0. We have already been working with that in 6 years. I think this opportunity right now to use all this big data with some kind of specific tools, with some kind of processing capacities, and also the cloud, is giving us a lot of opportunities right now to improve the efficiency of the lines, to share in real time what is going on with the different lines all over the world. And I think we are really improving right now the efficiency of our facilities by doing that. But we need to go to this level because the level of competition and the request of efficiency by our customers is huge every day.
How easy is it for you to drive that disruptive breakthrough behavior when you have your R&D, you have your settled teams, looking for the best technology, looking for the best solutions? What's your role in driving that thinking, the disruptive behavior, to try and find the best solutions?
Well, I think in our sector, and maybe in other sectors, more in the area of B2C, sometimes it's not so easy to read what are the demands of our customers. But in the case of the auto, it's very simple because they just shout their needs to you every day. So you need just to hear what they need and then to work very close with them. In the past, we used to work in a kind of independent silos. Right now, we do much more kind of co-development systems. They already know that they are moving away and they don't even have sometimes special capacity for the new technologies around lightweighting. So we work together with them for some kind of targets in order to be able to have a target of weight, a target of money. So we do that, and by doing that, we are introducing different kind of materials, moving to technologies like hot stamping or introducing different hybrid solutions. I think it's a kind of natural move, working together with them day by day.
Francisco, thank you very much for answering the question on how disruptive, and I understand that you naturally in the automotive industry link daily with your customer and you listen intently to what he wants, what innovations, how the products are changing. A lot of industries aren't as close to their customers as you are, and I think they can learn from that lesson that the more synergies you have in your supply chain, the closer you are to your customer, the easier it is for you to gauge what strategy is necessary to transform your business. So I'd like to thank you very much. I'd like to move on now to Vitor Neves, who's led transformation in his own business, Colep, over 20 years, global in the Americas, in Europe, in Asia, considered to be a market leader. In more recent years, he's been attacking Strat to action, transforming his business for a second wave of growth. And it's that I'd like to I'd like him to talk to you about. So, Vitor, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So, to start with, I will basically give the viewers a bit of context of what Colep is and our journey I would say in the last 2 decades. But I will mostly focus, as you were saying, Charlie, on the last 3-4 years because of its implication. So I would say, just to start with, and if we go back to the year 2000, we were a mid-sized Portuguese company. So Portugal is not a big country, right? So we were, I would say, mid-sized company, basically operating in Portugal in 2 different market segments. One is metal packaging, in which the typical customers are paint, lubricant, food customers. And on the other hand, the contract manufacturing of consumer products. So in this second part of the business, we typically or traditionally worked as an outsourcer of big multinational companies, which would, basically outsource the supply chain, including the manufacturing of product ranges or specific products of their product ranges. So I'm coming back to the year 2000 because that's basically when strategically we decided to be, initially a very important company in Europe. The first big step that we have done was building, at that time, a state-of-the-art plant in Poland. So between Portugal and Poland, we were able basically to have an European offer. So that allowed us to grow, I would say, significantly between 2000 and 2004. In 2004, there was one of probably the major or the most important milestones in the company development. So we merged our Colep business with one of the other leaders in the industry in Europe, a Canadian company called CCL Industries. So at that time, we created what we called then Colep CCL. So with that move, we became the market leader in Europe. And then, in the next few years, we started really growing the company, mostly organically, right? From 2004 to 2010, we grew significantly in Europe based on this joint venture. In 2010, we made an additional acquisition of our most important competitor in Europe, a German company. So we became even stronger in Europe. Also, as Francisco was saying, we suffered, of course, in 2008, 2009, 2010, the impacts of the big financial crisis that the whole world suffered. Of course, we also had to restructure significantly. We streamlined our footprint in Europe in a very strong way. I believe we came out much stronger from that experience. And at that time we said, okay, we are now quite strong in Europe, so we should really step out of Europe. So our first step was to go into Brazil, again in a joint venture. So we acquired 51% of 3 companies in Brazil, 3 companies belonging to the same shareholder. So we became a majority shareholder of a Brazilian company. Then in 2013-14, we expanded our operations to Mexico with our own operations, so we're 100% Colep operation, and in Dubai, again in a very specific joint venture with a Dubai-based group. At the same time, we were doing a strategic alliance in Asia with a company which was, I would say, similar in size and operations similar to us. We had no intention of investing in Asia. They had no intention of investing in the Western world. So we created a joint venture or a strategic alliance there to really be able to offer similar services to our multinational customers all across the globe. We start building on this model of being global, at the same time being local because of local customers that we also serve in each one of the different markets. And this would bring us, I would say, in 2018, in which we were basically facing, I would say, two problems. One problem was the lack of a very strong operating model, right? Because we were at that stage too decentralized in terms of decision-making, in terms of, what's our operating model. And at the same time, we were struggling to find the proper methodology for strategy deployment. So we would work on our strategies, but as Charlie was saying in the introduction, one thing is to understand what you want to become, what you want to do. The other thing is actually do it, right? So how do you really bring the strategy into the concrete things that you really need to do in order to get to those strategic goals? So, and I would say from the end of the second half 2017 until the end of 2018, we were very much focused on creating the solutions for these two very important problems that we were feeling at that time, that in fact were hampering the full exploitation of our potential, let's say, but they were also hampering the growth that the company wanted to have. And so I would say the solutions that we got for both problems were on the, let's say, on the operating side. Until then, until 2017, we were doing, I would say, a lot of Kaizen improvement actions. But at that time, we decided to consolidate all of those actions into one important operating model. So we spent a significant amount of time and effort building a very strong operating model, which we at the end call the One Collab Improvement Model. Basically 3 pillars in that model. So the daily improvements, the project improvements, and then the people that have to work on all of these things. And I would say this has been something that the whole organization has taken extremely serious, and it has delivered extremely good results in these last 2-3 years. The other thing was, that methodology for the strategy implementation. So at that time, we were doing a number of initiatives in terms of training people and what we call the Collab University and so on and so on. And so, we asked a couple of groups to study what would be their recommendation in terms of strategy implementation. And, I would say very easily, people came up with what I think is called the matrix X, or the X matrix for strategy implementation. So basically, we selected this kind of methodology. At the same time, we were in this process of the Kaizen implementation with the Kaizen Institute. And Charlie, was working with us at that time, his colleagues at the Kaizen Institute. And so somehow we transformed the basic principles of the X matrix into what they call the Hoshin methodology. Meaning not only we will apply the methodologies related with the X matrix, but we will do those in, let's say the breakthrough concept. So how do we bring breakthrough concepts into the normal implementation of the strategy? So I would say that has taken a significant portion of management attention in Colab in the last 3 years. I would say the impact has been extremely significant. So not only we have improved significantly in the creation of that operating model, and as Charlie and Francisco were discussing before, the things related with the basic quality, cost, and delivery, we have improved significantly, consistently in all of these indicators. I believe that today we have a much stronger operating model all across the business. And on the Hoshin part, it has helped us, I would say, in very basic 2 or 3 things. One is to focus on the real important things, to really separate what's really important for growth, then probably those things that consume a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money, but at the end don't deliver what we expect. So really focus on very important things. Then aligning the organization, because the methodology, I would say, is quite simple to understand and to explain. And as I was saying a few minutes before, introducing this, not only the incremental approach, but also the breakthrough concept. As I said, I think things went very well in the last 3 years, right? We have improved systematically, our results. We had our best year ever last year in 2020, in spite of all of the problems that we all suffered with the COVID pandemic. I think we now have a very clear path for growth again. As Charlie was saying, this also served us to think how would we configure the next few years of the company's growth. And one of the decisions that we have taken, I would say already, probably a couple of years ago, but we are right now in the process of implementing, is really to provide a lot more autonomy to our business units. So we are basically splitting our businesses, creating separate companies to really empower our business units with a clear path for growth. So all in summary, I think the last 3-4 years, with these 2 actions of really taking all or an important part of the Kaizen methodologies into a much stronger operating model, much more consistent, uniform across the company, together with a good tool for strategy implementation, I think on one hand has delivered short term, but I'm also fully convinced that it's the right path forward for long-term growth. Charlie, I don't know if I answered your questions.
Thank you, Vitor. It's I've been closely associated with Colab, helping you develop the X matrix and build Kaizen into the strategy, as well as incrementally improving the business. It's a testimony to the process. One of the reasons why I invited you here was because you've had incremental, but you've also had substantial change, and it's all been driven in a very structured way. Now, looking at where you're going to go, splitting the business, collapsing the organization, to give you a more streamlined, independent business unit. And it'll be interesting to see what we can achieve in the next 3 years. So Vitor, I want to thank you very much. Francisco, really interested in your insights. I think the audience will be too. I'd like to thank you both very much. And now we're going to move on to part 2, which is about deployment and how do we actually make it happen. Thank you. Okay. So now we move to the second part of this event, which is to do with deployment of the strategy. And you could argue that a strategy that's deployed poorly was never a strategy in the first place. We work very hard to support what you want with how you're going to do it. And I'm really pleased to introduce to you 2 speakers, Mark Wilson, Global Business Improvement Director for Ocado, and Peter Evans, Continuous Improvement Director for Lego. Now, they're very similar, but very different. So Ocado is at the leading edge of retail, automatic warehousing. And I know when I was talking with Mark prior to this, he was telling me that some of his objectives are to improve fill rates 10 times, tenfold. So this is where you have a classical model meeting a very solid target. And I think what Mark will talk to you about is he's used very much what helps him get to where he goes. Very much in the line of the classical model, but there is nothing to say that you can't optimize it and use it the way you need to use it to get the results. So I think that's a very business-like way of using the Strat to action process. Similarly with Peter in Lego, a family business with great heritage, strong strategy, very strong culture, they introduced the classical model some 4 years ago and have developed it to suit their needs. And so, although the book is written in a very prescriptive way, you can take what you need to move the business where you need to move it. So we heard from both Francisco and Vitor different approaches to their strategy. And what this tells me is Strat to action is it is translatable. It can change. So with much anticipation, I'm looking forward to both Mark and Peter. I'd like to start with Mark. So over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me today. So yes, I guess the key things I wanted to share today are just talking about, so we've been through a long, lean journey, I guess, what we'd call it. And we've tried various different elements over the years and definitely tried to do a thorough job at various stages of our history and our journey. But in reality, we'll be honest and say that actually to go as fast as we've needed to, we've had to cut some corners and probably find the elements that are most important to us. So we had to look at everything we possibly could to go faster. The growth has always been substantial in our business, which we've been lucky to be part of. But the last 18 months really is, well, I guess it's over a year, 18 months, particularly when we've not only moved internationally to try and deploy, 10 times what we've achieved in the last 10 years in the next 2 years. Not only did we try and do that over that period, then on top of the COVID and I guess we'd call it endless demand, it's put new pressures on us really, and challenged us in every department. So in terms of deployment, I think it's key from a strategic point of view is to work out exactly what works for your business and works for your culture. And key to us, and the one thing we will not let go is measurement. Okay, so you need to understand where you are, and you need to understand what you should measure. Although that sounds very obvious, it is easy to get carried away and go at such a pace where you get distracted by what you should be measuring. So, and as you know, our online platform continues to develop, we actually need to work out different ways of measuring. So that's the sort of one core element of improvement that you just can't live without, and that's key. That's been key for us.
Thank you. Perhaps you might share with us a few thoughts on poor performance versus standardization.
Yeah, as we all know, actually, standard work is often not as standard as you think it is, and good Gemba, you've got to get out there and prove that what you think you're doing, you're really doing, and that's been difficult in the last year, actually, for us, because historically it's always been easy to just go and walk around the shop floor and validate exactly how things are doing. And of course, you need to make sure that your night shifts and your back shifts and your weekend shifts are doing exactly how you think you're doing, and need to understand how come that particular shift is achieving more than you expected. But actually in the last year, it's one of the biggest challenges with going live across into different countries, trying to support different clients and not having the ability to see for yourself has been probably the biggest wrench for us, because we expected to be traveling the world and supporting our clients on the floor, and doing this remotely in this new world, it has made it significantly different. And and I think that's why it's always key to be flexible. Just because it says it in a book, if you've got a new challenge, actually to work your way through that is it's part of the challenge, I guess.
Mark, if I can summarize, standardization is a moving feast. Speaking with data keeps you clear in terms of the solution, and countermeasuring is the way you get performance.
That's an excellent summary of the last year, I would say. And yes, it's a refined strategy, I guess, but it's worked for us, and I think that's the most important. Don't slow things down for the want of a perfect process. If it's working for you, follow it and deliver it, and you'll reap the results. And if necessary, go back and learn from it where you went wrong, but you have to rock and roll with it. And our culture is very much in that way, because we've been doing it for a long time. We're able to sustain that with some excellent people. You do need to trust the people who are doing it, but when you do trust them, just let them go.
Thanks, Mark. I'd like to talk to Peter now, the same question. You started with the classical model, and then it evolved to match Lego's needs. You have a strong culture of continuous improvement. I'd like to understand what you've done to make it fit your organization.
Yeah, so at Lego, we've always been a very connected business. So our strategy is set out in very clear ways by the family, followed by our executive board, followed by your division, followed by your function, down to your team, down to the individual. And we've always been pretty good at that. And it's one of the reasons why we're so successful, because everybody gets it. We have a very clear brand framework, very clear set of values, a very clear set of passions that everybody assigns to. It's one of the reasons you join the Lego group. And we were using X Matrix and some of the Hoshin Kanri stuff up to about 3 years ago. And it worked okay, and it worked better for some functions than others. It was based on a fairly complex Excel tool that people hated, but there were aspects of it that worked very, very well. For instance, the transformation plan that comes out the back of it worked very, very well, and we still use. So what we do now more is, rather than concentrate on the tool, we concentrate on the spirit of what it is we're trying to achieve, which is a very aligned business against a very few, very, very small number of key things we want to achieve, and then we drive that like crazy. We align, we make sure everything aligns to that, whether it's within your own division. For instance, in the back office, you know, you might say, well, it's very hard perhaps to work on drive demand as an example, but actually you can find ways to do that because we need to enhance speed, we need to support a whole range of things that the rest of the company does. And we can make sure we align, and we can make sure everybody understands the story. And by understanding the story, we can then make progress and deliver on the things we commit to deliver. So it's pretty simple, actually.
So it's clear that the Hoshin brings you alignment, but in the significant few ideas rather than the many things that you can do, the breakthroughs as we would call them. And the key is to focus on those things that are going to move your business forward. I
used to have an old boss who used to call it picking right from right. And I actually think that's spot on, right? It's difficult and there's a lot of anxiety around it, and somebody's pet projects get lost in the way, but you have to pick right from right, and you have to drive it inexorably forward, right? That's how you achieve the great growth that we've had over the last years and continue to have, because we're very, very focused on delivering the key things that keep the business moving forward.
So in listening to both of you, it's very clear that you've adapted the models to suit your business needs. And that's, you know, 1, 2, 3 years into the journey, it's absolutely what you should be doing. It's clear that the book talks about the standard blueprint, and to get you aligned, to go through the stress in the organization, to start moving you towards accepting the significant few. Yes, we have a standard blueprint, but I think you've moved beyond that. Mark was talking about a 10-fold increase in fulfillment, which when you look at it, you have to have a structure, but you have to have a very efficient structure. So you have to use what you need to move the business forward at that moment. So I think it would be crazy to think that the model that you start with is the model that you end with 3 or 4 years, 5 years down. And I think from the Lego perspective, that's exactly what you've done. You know, Peter's told us about how they started with the classical matrix, and they started to develop the performance metrics and the X matrix and the Excel spreadsheets, which is typically what happens. And then there was pushback, and then there was a light bulb moment where you said, this isn't working. We need to not forget who we are. We need to add our own identity to the process. I think that's very encouraging for me. Thank you both. But I'm intrigued, Peter, about the problem with the Excel. Perhaps you'd just share that moment with us.
Well, I think there are a number of things. You know, if the tools you use are difficult to use, people don't want to do it, and they will find other ways, right? We're very creative, right? I work in a very creative business, but humans are very creative, and they're going to find ways around it. And if it's difficult to use, they're not going to want to do that. If it creates longer conversations than they actually feel is necessary because the strategy is pretty straightforward, then it becomes difficult to do. And, you know, as they always say, right, a fool with a tool is still a fool. And so learning the tool doesn't get you a great strategy, right? What gets you a great strategy is a very aligned set of thinking.
I suppose I'm seeing it. You must be seeing it also, the need to automate the Hoshin process, the need to have the matrix linked to the performance measurements and the countermeasure reports. And I call it management by algorithm, but you know, do we need, and I suppose, Mark, I'll ask you this, do you need a sophisticated, automated model to know where your problems are?
No, actually simple is always better. Actually, I was going to back up on what Peter said. We find that if you you can create friction with something that people don't like. You've got to remove the friction to create the improvement. I said, ironically, half my life I seem to be talking about removing friction and adding traction.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't think they quite match, but yeah, that's a lot of my terminology is exactly that. And yeah, simplifying it and actually turning the data into something that everyone understands is much more useful than having complex data and complex outputs that you need some genius analyst to understand. Often it's better to oversimplify and create an index number that doesn't actually mean everything, but at least people know that from moving from 10 to 11 is better.
Yeah, I agree. It was explained to me very well. I quite like the analogy of a football match where you can't see the goals. There's like a big wooden wall in front of the goal, and you kick the ball over the wall, and then you don't see it enter the goal. You just hear somebody cheering. You sort of lose sight of it. And so it's important that we keep the goal or the target very much in front of us. And you don't need to understand all of the number of passes and the movements of the ball to know when you've scored that goal. I like the idea of simple measurement that everybody understands. Keeping it visible, is very important. You're masters of your own business. You're continuing to drive improvement and breakthrough. I would ask you now to give us some indication of the types of improvement and the size of improvement that you're actually seeing in your business. Mark.
I feel a bit guilty really, because obviously it's been exceptional times for us. But yeah, I think it's only fair, not because the amount of people involved in working on it. So we have our most important facility in just south of the Thames in London, which is by far the biggest. I think when Boris Johnson told everybody to order food online, our demand went 100 times greater than we'd ever seen on our Christmas peak. So to put on the scale of the demand, clearly we were never going to deliver that. But we managed to take what is a brand new platform, brand new technology, brand new software, and robots that we own all of the elements. In that year, it wasn't even that. In 9 months, we doubled the throughput of the site, and with the same headcount. So you double the efficiency and double the throughput in a year. I mean, some of that is, there's a hell of a lot of focus with people when you've got, you're all sat at home and you've got all the right people doing, focused on one element, but it does show what you can achieve when everyone has one objective in mind. And of course, our objective was growth, capacity. So there was no one was talking about saving money. No one was talking about even quality to a certain element, because suppliers were struggling to get goods to us. There were it was, so you can tailor. Normally we try and move everything equally or focus on the strategy can be 75% one way or 25% the other. But when you just go for one thing and everyone aligns, that's the sort of output you can get. And that's why we're in the job, isn't it? That's what we enjoy.
When I wear my consulting hat with Kaizen Institute, I run quite a few workshops looking at deploying targets and stretch goals, and we have to artificially stretch the company because there isn't a burning platform considered to be doing okay. The results are as they've always been, but to be disruptive, to start to get the breakthrough thinking, to really make the change happen, we have to raise the bar. And I'm always interested when they think that 3% is good, and I use the comment, "My dog will get you 3%." What we're really interested in is to get breakthrough. We need to start thinking in double digits. And I like your double in 9 months. I think that's a unique situation, but it just goes to prove that the focus, the need, the fact that you had to do it drives you to achieve those tremendous results. Is it all Hoshin? No. Hoshin is just one part of it. It's a way of aligning you to keep you focused. It gives you an umbrella network, an umbrella framework that you can use. And so I really do like doubling. So over to Peter. It's quite simple. Double your productivity in 9 months. How are you doing?
Well, I don't think it's quite as that, but let's face it. Lego, as everybody knows, says the Lego group has grown pretty substantially over the last 15, 16, 17 years. We grew 21% last year. We continue to grow very successfully, a very successful business. We do that because of a whole bunch of things, not least of all being very clear on our strategy and the reasons why we exist. And that alignment helps us. If I take you down to our business services operation, our global business services, if you like, over the last 3 years, as we started up a brand new service and started to grow it, we had a very clear strategy around what we were trying to do. We wanted to grow and build and grow services because we'd never really done that in the past. We did accounting and we did HR stuff, but we didn't have a service. We wanted to grow productivity to help the scalability of the Lego group. And we wanted to grow compliance and drive that piece around, not least of all around standardization. And we achieved that pretty magnificently. Our internal NPS grew from a start at -19 to +41 last year, so a 60-point growth in 3 years. Our standardization has grown dramatically, and we still have stretched targets for that, so that globally everybody in the Lego group gets the same service and the same process from our organization. Our productivity grows typically 5 to 10% every year, but that is based on a growth of a company. That ignores the growth of the company. That's just on our ability to maintain headcount over that period of time while the company's grown substantially, massively actually. So when you put all those things together, we know that being aligned and very focused on a few things has enabled us to grow to the point now where our 21 to 23 strategy is about taking on bigger services, wider services, doing more for the Lego group, because we've earned the right out of achieving our strategy in the past years.
Thank you. Excellent results. And I've worked with businesses that don't have the growth and they're driving continuous improvement, and all they're doing is shrinking, which is not a good situation. So continuous improvement, Kaizen, breakthrough really operates well when you have a growth dynamic as well. You get that absorption, that productivity that you can really see. I'm conscious that we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to be looking for one pearl of wisdom from each of you. I'm sure there are many, but in conclusion, I like the weight that you give to Strat to action. You've developed your own ways of using it to keep you focused. The pearls of wisdom have probably come over many years of application and toil and trepidation and learning. But I would ask you if you could impart the 1 or 2 key things that you think executives really need to focus on. They cost you a lot of pain and a lot of burning of the midnight oil, I'm sure, and you're going to give them away for free. So I thank you for that. You're very generous. And so I'd like you to give up those pearls of wisdom before we leave.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I still think it comes from leadership at the top. The leadership has to care. Yeah. So and they want to be really passionate about those improvements and show how much they care. And then that filters through because everyone's proud to be part of it. And then almost, whatever strategy you do, they're all aligned. You're all aligned because you're going for the same goal. So I've never seen it work without the leaders really taking
very good.
A key part.
There is Mark, I couldn't agree more. Leadership is an absolute maxim. I had a good friend, I still have a good friend, George Koningsaker. He's credited with the architecture and designing the Danaher business system. And he said about making change, transformation, Kaizen. Kaizen is leadership intensive. You don't get it for free. It has to be led from the top. I think the point you make is extremely important. Peter, you get the last word, so over to you.
Yeah, I guess, you know, there's an old kind of sporting adage, which is that the harder you practice, the luckier you get, right? And this is about effort. It really is about connecting as leaders the why to the purpose, to what you're trying to achieve, and being consistent about that. Your people see through it very, very quickly, right? So if you tell them that the number one important thing is your people, but you pay a load of them off every December, you will stop believing you fairly quickly. Yeah. So you have to be really clear about what you're doing, what your purpose is, do that with honesty and integrity, and then drive that relentlessly. And it doesn't come easy. It's a lot of hard work. So the companies that do this well, I can tell you, put a lot of effort in to making sure these things happen well. That's my key message.
So thank you, Peter. That's very insightful. I suppose from my perspective, the way I think about it is you can't just tear the page out of the book, give it to the manager and just expect him to do it. There's a lot of thinking, planning, training, leading to get you to a point where people start to understand how this all links together. And I suppose in the early stages, people are skeptical of the change. People resist change, and you have to fight through that first. And then I guess the integrity of the company has to stand the test. I want to thank you for those comments. I thought that was excellent. It takes time to get results. And I just tell you from my own experience in Danaher, I worked with George Koningsaker, who was the architect of the Danaher business system. And when you look back with him, it took him 5 years of writing and testing and implementing the Danaher business system before he could see a step change, before he could see results over and above what you would expect in any other company. And then it became standard, and now it's part of their DNA. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope when I'm in the UK, we can meet in person. I would like that very much. We could continue our discussions. All it remains for me to say to you is, both of you, Peter, Mark, thank you very much. It's been an open and very fruitful discussion. We're now going to move on to the Q&A panel. So please, you're part of that Q&A panel. Let's see what the participants want to know more about. Thank you very much. I've got a list of questions that we've received from our audience, and I'm just going to take them in the order that we received them. So this is the first question. It goes to Francisco and Vitor. It's from Tesco, that high street supermarket chain. What's more difficult, or what requires more effort? Defining the way to go, convincing the team, or working with the ones that don't believe the vision? So, Francisco, please, your thoughts on this.
Well, it's not a simple question. I think from my side, probably the most important thing is trying to be able to build a kind of a solid project that everybody in the group is able to feel that is their own project. So at the end of the day, we are not talking about changes in the strategy and this kind of thing. We are talking about building a project together. As far as the project is really growing, the kind of motivation of the teams usually is very high. But it is true that it's a long way to go, and sometimes there are people, for any reasons, that started to be disconnected. I think, of course, for us, we spend time with them, and it depends. Sometimes there are people who maybe are not so so positive with the project, and there are other cases that people, for reasons of age or whatever, they are not able anymore to really follow the project. So in this case, our first priority is always the project, and we are always trying to find the logical succession plans for people who are not able to really keep on moving. But again, if everybody clearly see the project as their project, at the end of the day, all these decisions are clear, even though always these kind of personal decisions are rather complex.
Thank you, Francisco. Perhaps now we could hear from Vitor. So just a reminder of the question. What requires more effort? Defining the way to go, convincing the team that's where they need to go, or working with those that don't believe the vision? Vitor, please.
Thank you for the question. So I believe that probably setting the direction is the easiest part, right? So, you know, you look at what's happening in the markets in which you are involved in. You understand the market requirements, the customer requirements, what are your strengths and weaknesses. So I think that part is probably the easiest to get to. I would say everybody in the market will probably see a similar picture. I think the most of the work has to be done exactly as Francisco was saying, in terms of really building and working with the team in terms of how to implement the things, right? So I would say 80% of the effort, in my view, has to be spent there. If we do it right, at least I think we need to be optimistic and say that there will be a very few number of people who will basically not be interested in participating or rejecting it, right? So I think that by involving people, you will really bring people with you.
It's interesting having listened to the response of how you get people engaged and communicate, and work with the larger team. There's a supplementary question coming from Airbus, and it's exactly on that theme. Vitor, perhaps you'd finish the discussion on this. How important is it to get mid-level management engaged with the strategic objectives? How do you do this with multinational teams that are spread across the organization? And I guess globally, what we're talking about there, the difficulty of getting to all four corners of your organization. Vitor, please.
Okay, good. So if I may start this time, I think it's absolutely critical to involve all levels of management and ultimately all of the people in the organization, right? I was talking about how we have implemented the X-Matrix Hoshin methodology. A very good thing of it is that it allows for a very simple communication. It becomes a very simple communication tool, because in fact, in basically one page, you have all of the very important things that people have to work on. So I think with those kind of methodologies, I think you can really bring people together and align them, right? In a multinational environment, I would say, and mainly when we talk about very different geographies, a good thing that we have in our company is that we have common customers, right, across the globe, which means that it's, I would say, easy for people to communicate between the different regions in terms of what really needs to be done to serve the customers. So, of course, this pandemic situation has created some difficulties in terms of how to put people to communicate, you know, mainly physically, because we have not traveled for 1.5 years. We used to travel every week, by the way. But again, I believe that the secret is having, you know, a sound base of what are you communicating and bringing people together in those objectives. That's for me the crucial thing.
Thanks, Vitor. Keeping it simple, keeping it easy to understand, using the matrix, the one page to communicate to all the organizations seems to be the secret to the way you communicate. I wonder, Francisco, whether you have a similar view to that. Francisco.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, in order to be able to move organization ahead, you need to have a good team, which has to be skilled and motivated. And in order to reach this motivation to all levels of the organization, of course, all the levers we have in order to increase internal communication are very, very relevant, and especially in this moment of COVID. But of course, whenever we go to different countries with different cultures, you need to give some kind of room to these areas to really adapt the kind of culture to countries like India or China. Is completely different. But in any case, for me, the important thing is sometimes, for instance, if we get to this kind of mid managers, I think for me, sometimes it's very difficult to change inertia and try to be able to send a message. For instance, if you want to focus from growth to cash, it is very important to convince these people, but always a kind of mid managers in a plant, they would love to have much more machinery and capex rather than to focus in cash. So in any case, communication absolutely key.
It was interesting, Francisco, when you talked about communicating down at the mid levels in the operations. They want more inventory, more cash, more machinery. I thought that was very relevant. And sometimes, they can't have it. And so the communication has to be clear what the focus is. I saw everybody smiling when you were talking that. So thank you for that. We got a couple more questions on strategy before we move to deploying the actions. Vitor, what impact do mergers and acquisitions have on a company's strategy? How do you manage that? What are the challenges? And really, how do you guarantee the smooth transition? So to Vitor, please.
I believe that mergers and acquisitions play or may play a very important role. In our case, it has played a very important role because our growth path has been, in fact, a combination of organic growth with a number of M&A activities. In the case of the M&A activities, we have also experienced many different situations. Let me just give you a very simple example. Today, we have a JV in Dubai in which basically Colab runs the company, but we own no shares, right? So it's a kind of JV that we found to be present in that market. So I would say it plays a very, very important role if you really want to grow your business. In all of these experiences, we have had, of course, things that went very well and things that had not gone well, right? For me, the absolutely critical thing is sharing values. If you are merging or acquiring, specific company in which you share your values, things will go well. If you don't share values, things will not go well. So values are a very important part of culture, but values for me today, after these 20 years of doing all of these things in multiple occasions, in multiple continents also, values for me is the real critical thing to look at when you are on the M&A path.
Vitor, it was really interesting. This point about values suddenly struck a chord with everybody. I noticed we were all nodding because it's probably underrated and it's difficult to communicate, but very much we have to replant our beliefs and DNA into the new businesses so that we all stay focused and we have the same levels of integrity and communication. So I want to thank you for that. It's fundamentally very important, and it's easy to say, it's not so easy to do. And it's one of those hidden messages that only through doing can you have learnt the value of doing it. So I think that's a big takeaway for our audience. work hard on the strategic objectives, but also work hard on the values of the core business. Thank you very much for that. We have the final question on strategy, and then we're going to move on to deployment. And this is for Francisco, and it's a really a simple question, but a difficult one to answer, I think. It's from Deutsche Bank. And basically, they're saying, what advice would you give to a company that doesn't have a growth-driven strategy? So, Francisco, please.
Okay, it's not easy to give an advice, because sometimes that will depend on the sector, the company, or maybe the geography, no? And it's also true that in some moment of time, companies need to have a moment to maybe slow down, to stabilize, and maybe to focus a little bit more in efficiency and cash rather than in growth. But my answer is that a company needs to grow. And in the long run, they need to grow. And if a company is not really pushing for growth, it will fall one moment to another. And for me, it is absolutely almost impossible to keep a team really motivated if there is no growth. And of course, for instance, in a kind of competitive sector like the one of the auto, there is no way to offset, let's say, the inflation cost if you are not really able to really grow and become much more stable. So to be honest, in at least in our company, growth is a must. And for me, the only way to motivate and to build the sense that we have a project that is really a winning project. If you are not growing, at the end of the day, you are not being able to offer exciting products to your customers. So at the end of the day, a problem. So you need to grow.
Francisco, thank you very much. The Americans would say, if you're not growing, you're dying. A bit harsh, but I think your explanation is very pertinent. Status quo is not exciting. Therefore, how can you excite the team? How can you excite the customers? I thought it was very interesting, but there are pauses in your strategy where you need to consolidate, standardize, before you move to the next wave of growth. Thank you very much for those insights. We're now going to switch gears and we're going to move into deployment. And these questions are equally for Peter and Mark. Well, the first one has come to us from Radius Aerospace, and it's an interesting one. I'm really looking forward to the answers on this. There are many intangibles that are difficult to measure, but equally they're very important in the implementing the strategic objectives. And whilst we know we're in continuous improvement, we know that it happens. We know that the culture is changing, but how do you drive this with distinct KPIs? So that's the question. How do you measure and how do you drive the culture of these indefinable, intangible gains?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and I think I understand where it's coming from in terms of it depends what you call intangible. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure I accept that there are intangibles necessarily. There are things that are more difficult to measure than others. But if you think of it, and I also think that if you only think on the path of CI, you have a very narrow focus then on specific incidents. My view is to take a more operational excellence view on these things. And I think if you're really working well in that space and you're thinking about customer value and leadership and process and performance management, problem solving and people, then actually you have by nature an ability to manage manage and measure these aspects. We worry about these a lot in Lego Group, as you would expect a group with a very strong culture and a very strong set of values. So people motivation and satisfaction, stakeholder value, whether that's in terms of CSAT or NPS or customer effort or a whole range of things like that, we worry about all the time. And I think if you're thinking about that, those intangibles become tangible because you can actually start to see how those things grow. And you see how your people are growing. And one of our big objectives, for instance, in our shared service organization in BSO in the Lego Group, is that people grow within our group and we can measure flow, for instance. So people who improve their career and move forward through their career, whether that's into wider Lego group or within BSO. So there are many ways of doing it, and I don't think you should kind of relax on it. It's one of those things where if you think in the round and you think really hard about your scorecard, preferably balanced, then you will be able to see these things quite clearly. That's my view on that one.
Mark, your thoughts on the same question, the intangibles. How do you measure them? How do you see the gains? Mark, please.
I do. I wish we were as good as Pete in that respect. As in, it's not always possible to be perfect and put some numbers around it, and I don't think it necessarily requires it. Sometimes I think more important to us is progress, so that the speed in which you can deliver even small things, and bang for buck we talk about. So what can we do quickly and make progress, and that tends to generate the energy that makes people feel like they're making progress. So even just changing a report slightly so it makes the operators' lives a bit easier. It might not be a big piece of work, it might not be in the strategy, but it's incredible the energy you can get that flows back up and they feel they're engaged and make a difference. And you can't really put some numbers on it specifically, but it's really important in our business that we keep everyone as close together as possible so that energy flows back up and down those lines. So I think it's really easy to get too hung up on the accuracy of the numbers, and in the end it's just more important about deploying those improvements as fast as possible, because that's where you get the progress, and that's definitely the energy we sort of strive for.
Thanks, Mark. I always like your practical approach, which is let's keep doing stuff well, big and small. Let's keep the ball moving. And if we can't measure the fact that we know the culture's changing, let's not create a whole set of KPIs to try and understand that. I remember from my early operational days, we used to talk about taking the sticking plasters off people's fingers. Simple things that are very difficult for them that you might walk past and say, this really isn't, it's not part of the strategic plan, but very much it's part of their day-to-day, the way they measure us. So I thought your very practical approach, as well as, Peter talking about trying to get a handle on these metrics, I think is, it's a balance. So thank you. The last question, it's from Volvo Construction Equipment, and it's a big question. It's got a lot of pieces to it. How does Ocado train their leaders in lean? I suppose that's the bridge. Do you have special programs for the leaders? Is there a mandatory career path to take a position? Who and how do you coach? I try not to say anything reference to this, but from my own experience, training is one thing, but learning by doing is a very powerful way of getting people engaged and understanding. But Peter and Mark, please, your thoughts.
It's a really good question, and it's a bit hard hitting actually when we look at it, because we definitely haven't got a global strategy on how we want to, even I don't think we've decided how exactly we want to do it across the whole business. But each of the departments have very much got their own focus and drive to make those improvements through their methodologies. So, and it's pretty much department led actually, because I think each department has its own requirements. So, I would say to a certain extent, it's something we will be looking at in the next, probably the next year or so. But each team is using actually Kaizen Institute actually in certain respects in different ways to try and work out what the next steps should be and how to do it. So I think that sums it up for me.
Yeah, we also don't have a corporate strategy on this, but I can tell you what we're doing in business services. So, and I also slightly worry about the word leaders. We view all of our people as leaders, and I don't mean that in that kind of cod sense that you might get tripped out by your average people team. We do think that way. So within BSO, we've taken some decisions in that respect. We have taken every single one of our 400 plus employees within our group through a Lean Basics course. We're actually following Lean Competency System for that, so you'd understand that as level 1A. I'm a strong believer that this training and this learning needs to be attached to actual work and to actual doing. And so it's displayed learning. It's not sheep dipping. So we're not just putting through it for the sake of it. We're putting people through it because they're learning and they're using those skills. So every single one of our people has been or will be, I think we're at 400 plus already through the Lean 1A training. Every single one of our leaders, so people managers and other nominated people, so manager specialists and all people like that have gone through level 1B. That's about 80 or 90 people. At the next level up, again, very practical with implementation, particularly around things like visual management and areas like that. So we have a campaign that we're continuing to follow. It's part of our operational excellence strategy to develop that capability, but develop it in a very meaningful way. And we'll continue that over time to level 1C for some. Also some Lean and Six Sigma training in amongst all those things. So we'll develop on time. Our belief is that you develop the people and the tools at the right time in our progress along the journey for operational excellence. So I have no belief, and I've been in companies that count black belts and green belts and all those sort of things. I don't think that adds any value at all other than having a very nice graph on black belts and green belts. So I think that's the approach we're having right now, and it seems to be working pretty well for us.
A phrase that was coined not by me but by Masaki Imai was training just in time, and it meant two things. It meant give people what they need to do their job better. Don't give them everything they need or they could learn, because then you're just creating a school, and not everything that they learn they're going to use. So I find that I'm in strong alignment with training people, training the organization for the things that it needs to do now. And there should be a window of looking forward. So very much in tune with you guys. I just wonder one last supplementary question, and it's really coming from me and the team, which is Francisco and Vitor have talked a lot about culture and values as a driver for the implementation of the strategy. And I just wonder whether you're in tune with that, whether you see these as big primary drivers. So as a last question, over to Peter and Mark.
Okay, yeah, big style. You'd probably be surprised if I didn't, coming from the Lego group. So, you know, as I described, I think in the first part of this call, we are a very connected company. We're connected from the family, through the board, through our functions, through the teams, to the individuals. And that is all part of inbuilt into our culture. So that you'll never see a poster for values in Lego, but we interview for values, and we maintain those values very, very strongly. So I couldn't agree more. I think it's such a powerful piece, and actually the most powerful piece of how you deliver against that in a very complex VUCA world.
Yeah, I'm in massive agreement. I think culture is, talking about culture, talking about values is one thing, but then delivering on them is the key element. You can't just, have the nice words in the background on a poster. It's actually feeling that, and people talk about culture, and that's the intangible that it's come back in a full circle. How do you put a value on culture? It's very difficult to put some numbers against it, meaningful numbers. But ultimately, that's the most important part. If everyone feels like they're making a difference, feels like you're contributing to the success of that company, then you've got your culture right, haven't you? So, there's yeah, we use it a lot, but that's, I think, because we believe it. Yeah, that's the truth.
So we've come to the end of our time. I want to thank all the speakers, Francisco, Vitor, Peter and Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed immensely your responses and your interventions. When we wrote the book 3 years ago, we could see a distinct gap between Strat to Action, CEO frustration, and organizational deployment, and then the actions itself. I think, you know, your answers have strengthened that belief that if it's not managed well, then your strategy's going to fall by the wayside. I would part with one probably pearl of wisdom, which isn't mine really. It's Jack Welch's, I think, coined the phrase, strategy's just doing stuff really well. A small amount of time on strategy and a lot of time on the perfect implementation. And that's, I think, the sentiment of the book. We have a little bit of housekeeping, which is if there's any more outstanding Q&A. So these were the Q&As that were coming in while we were live on air. So if there will be more, I'm sure. We'll probably field those to individuals, and hopefully you can give us the answers and we can get back to whoever the originators were. I have a couple of things. CBM sponsored the event with Kaizen Institute. Want to thank them for including their membership and Kaizen Institute. Back office have been superb in terms of trying to make this happen in these difficult times. Ordinarily, we'd all be sat in an auditorium and we'd just make this happen. So I want to give a big thank you to the back office team. And from myself, Charlie Sharman, it's been a pleasure, and I hope we do this again. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.